Chapter 11, Nina's House Rules. Carol's house sat on a quiet road in the kind of neighborhood that didn't announce itself: modest yards, mature trees, the occasional cat on a windowsill. The screen porch faced the street, and caught the morning breeze off a stand of palms at the corner. Tuesday morning, the kind that arrived without ceremony and turned out to be exactly what was needed. Mary and Carol arrived together, as usual. Nancy pulled up a few minutes later, and came around the side gate, with the easy familiarity of someone who had been here before. Natalie and Ron arrived last, Natalie already moving toward the front door, eager for this specific part of the morning. Ron stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked at the door, then at Natalie. "I'll be out here." Natalie smiled. "I know. Tell Nina I said hello." "You're allergic to Nina." "Not emotionally," Ron said, and settled into one of the porch chairs with his coffee and the auction catalog. Inside, the house was cool and unhurried. Carol moved through it without hesitation, to the kitchen for the coffee pot, back to the living room with mugs, setting each one down in exactly the right place. Nothing tentative, nothing asked for. She knew where everything was because she had put it there. Mary set her bag on the floor beside the sofa and reached in for the Irish cream. She set it on the coffee table without comment. Carol, returning from the kitchen, reached for it without comment either. Some things didn't need announcing. Mary settled onto the small sofa with her coffee. The house was as she remembered it, unhurried. Everything in its place. The books Carol kept because she'd read them before her vision changed. The lamp with the pull cord at exactly the right height. A home that had been thought about rather than decorated. She had always thought Carol's talent for arrangement made sense when we knew her history. 20 years in a salon, her own salon, built from nothing, a chair at a time, had given her an acute understanding of space and how people moved through it. Where to put things so clients felt comfortable. How to arrange a room so it worked without making an announcement about itself. The salon had been meticulous, Mary had heard, in the way of places run by someone who genuinely cared about every detail. And then her vision had begun to change, and she had kept the meticulous part. Just adjusted what meticulous meant. "You have a beautiful home." "Thank you," Carol said. "I know where everything is, which helps." Nancy smiled. Nina appeared from the hallway. She was a small cat, mostly white with black spots, deliberate in the way of cats who had decided early that dignity was non-negotiable. She looked at the assembled group, assessed them, and walked directly to Natalie. Natalie crouched immediately. Natalie crouched. "There she is." Nina allowed herself to be picked up, resigned, gracious, willing to permit it on her own terms. "She's been eating well," Carol said, settling into her chair. "She looks wonderful," Natalie said, a little rounder. She'd discovered a sunny spot by the back window, Carol said. "She doesn't move for approximately 4 hours." "That's my girl," Natalie said. From the porch, Ron's voice came through the screen. "Is she on the good chair?" "Yes," Carol said. "Good," Ron said, and turned a page in the catalog. Carol went very still. She does that when Natalie's here. The pitch changes. Natalie looked up. "You can hear that?" "It's different," Carol said simply. Natalie smiled. She turned to Mary and Nancy, who hadn't heard the full story. "We found her together, at the shelter. She was older, had some health issues, hypothyroidism. A heart murmur the vet said was manageable but needed monitoring. Not the kind of cat people choose." She paused. "The shelter was going to put her down. They didn't have the resources for her long-term care and nobody was coming for her. 4 months she'd been there." 4 months, Nancy said. "We were both volunteering the same afternoon when we heard." Natalie glanced at Carol. "Neither of us could leave her there. The kind they overlook," Carol said. "Yes." Natalie scratched behind Nina's ear. "I wanted her but Ron's allergic. Carol said she'd take her but wanted me to still be part of her life." She paused. "So we arranged it." "How does that work exactly?" Nancy asked. "Nina lives here," Carol said. "Natalie visits. We share the vet bills. We share the worry. And we share the good news. Her thyroid levels have been stable for 8 months now. The murmur hasn't worsened. She's thriving," Natalie said. 4 months in that shelter and now look at her." Nina was purring steadily, entirely unconcerned with the discussion of her own medical history. "And Ron suffers on porches," Natalie added. "Voluntarily," Carol said. From outside, Ron's voice again. "I heard that." Nancy leaned back. "That's actually a very sensible arrangement." "It was Carol's idea," Natalie said. "It was the only idea that made sense," Carol said. "Nina existed. We both wanted her. The solution was obvious. Mary looked at her. Most people wouldn't have thought of it. Carol smiled. Most people make things more complicated than they need to be. Ron appeared at the screen door, catalog in hand. He didn't open it, just pressed it slightly to be heard better. Should we talk about the auction? He asked. Or are we doing the cat thing for a while longer? The cat thing, Natalie said, without looking up. Ron retreated. They stayed like that for another few minutes, Nina circulating between Natalie and the sunny patch near the window, coffee cups warming hands, the morning moving at the pace it wanted to. Carol refreshed the cups without being asked, locating the coffee pot in each mug by memory and touch. Eventually Natalie set Nina down and looked toward the porch. We should go out to him. Yes, Carol said. He's been patient. He's been sulking. Natalie said. He's been patient, Carol said again. They carried their coffees out to the screen porch. Ron looked up from his catalog with the expression of a man who had been waiting with barely sufficient dignity, and was relieved not to have to wait any longer. Nina, for her part, settled onto the good chair the moment everyone vacated the living room, which suggested the whole arrangement suited her perfectly. Ron opened the catalog on his lap. Carol had her glasses on. She angled them toward the catalog cover. Treasure Coast Maritime Auction, they said quietly. Jupiter, Florida. Wednesday. A pause. October. Another pause. Date unclear. Small font. October 20th, Ron said, without looking up. Wednesday. Carol took the glasses off. She had learned, over 8 months, to give them approximately one attempt before moving on. The glasses were better at large clear signage and worse at everything else. Auction catalogs with dense small font descriptions and photographs of dark metal objects, against dark velvet backgrounds, were not their strongest category. Tell me about it. Ron was already turning pages. Ron turned the first page. Here's what we're looking at. The catalog was spiral-bound, printed on heavy stock, the kind that suggested the auction house took itself seriously. Ron had already marked several pages with small adhesive tabs. The 1715 fleet went down in a hurricane on July 31st. They already knew this, but Ron's enthusiasm for the context was part of the experience. 11 ships. But the story starts earlier than that. He turned to the inside front cover of the catalog, which had a brief historical introduction he had clearly read many times. Spain sent 2 fleets to the New World every year, one to the Caribbean, one to South America. They collected gold, silver, trade goods, personal valuables from colonists heading home. The 1715 fleet had been delayed in Havana for nearly a year. Supply problems, diplomatic issues, hurricane season. He paused. They left Havana on July 24th. 7 days later, they were gone. All of them? Nancy asked. All but one, Ron said. One ship made it to St. Augustine. The rest went down along a 50-mile stretch of coastline between what's now Cape Canaveral and Fort Pierce. Right here, this coast. He gestured vaguely toward the east. The survivors made camp on the beach and waited for rescue. Many of them spent months there. And the cargo, Mary said. The cargo, Ron said. Silver reales, pieces of 8, by the millions. Gold escudos, jewelry, religious artifacts, personal valuables passengers were bringing back to Spain, navigation instruments, ship's hardware. He shook his head. Estimates put the total value at 14 million pesos, which in 1715 terms was an almost incomprehensible amount of money. And it's still down there, Carol said. Most of it is, Ron said. The Spanish sent their own salvage crews almost immediately. They recovered a significant portion within the first few years. Then it was forgotten. Then Kip Wagner found the first wreck site in 1959 and everything changed. He paused. Rex Stocker was part of that original team. He's been working this coast his whole life. What gets auctioned now? Nancy asked. What the licensed salvage operations bring up each season, Ron said. They work under state permit. Everything catalogued and documented. A percentage goes to the state. The rest the salvage company can sell. It's a legitimate industry, highly regulated. He opened the catalog to the first mark page, which is also, incidentally, why forgeries are such a problem. The provenance documentation exists for every genuine piece. A convincing fake needs convincing paperwork. He held the catalog toward Mary. Silver reales, he said. Pieces of 8. These are the most common find. Coins minted in Mexico, Peru, Bolivia. Many still have visible dates and mint marks. She looked at the photograph. A rough-edged coin, dark with age. The impression of a cross still faintly visible on one face. Beautiful things. These are lots 7 through 12. I'm not bidding on coins. Too many people chase them and the prices get silly. He turned another page. Gold escudos. Rarer. These are from lot 18. Another photograph. A small gold disc, thinner than a modern coin. The surface worn to a soft gleam. I thought about this one but I've seen better. He turned to another page. A length of gold chain. Photographed against a white background. Each link still distinct despite the corrosion. This is from the Carmen wreck, lot 24. A passenger's chain. Probably worn around the neck. He shook his head slightly. Somebody's everyday jewelry. Can you imagine? Just wearing it on an ordinary Tuesday in 1715. Nobody said anything for a moment. And then the storm, Nancy said quietly. And then the storm, Ron agreed. Nina had moved to the sofa arm nearest Mary. Mary let her sniff her hand. Here, Ron said, turning to a tab page near the middle. This is what I came for. He held the catalogue up. Mary leaned forward. The photograph showed a folding metal triptych, 3 hinged panels, each bearing a relief image. The central panel was larger, the 2 flanking ones narrower, designed to fold in for travel. The surface was dark with age, the relief worn but legible. A figure with a staff and a scallop shell. Santiago, Ron said. St. James, patron of Spain. A wealthy passenger would have carried this. It's a personal devotional object, not cargo. Someone prayed with this. He set the catalogue down carefully. It's lot 26. The provenance is documented. I've been watching it since the preview went up. The room was quiet for a moment. How much? Nancy asked. Ron named a figure. Nancy made a small sound. That's a lot of money for something someone prayed with 300 years ago. That's exactly why it's worth it, Ron said. What else is listed? Carol asked. Ron turned a few more pages. A gold chain recovered from the Carmen wreck, lot 31. A silver crucifix. Some rosary components. And here, he turned to the last tab page, lot 42. A St. Christopher medallion. Mary looked at the photograph. It was larger than she'd expected. Not a delicate charm but a substantial disc of gold. Perhaps the size of a large coin but thicker. Heavier looking even in the photograph. The relief showed a robed figure carrying a child on his shoulder, crossing water. The detail was worn but legible. Around the edge, a faint Latin inscription. St. Christopher, Ron said. Patron of travelers, of sailors. He looked at the photograph for a moment. Someone wore this around their neck on the night of July 31st, 1715, when the storm came in. Nobody said anything for a moment. Who's selling it? Carol asked. Ron glanced at the catalogue. Lot 42. Seller. He read the name. Jill Sanger. The name settled into the room and meant nothing. Not one of them had any reason to notice it. Not yet. She's a dealer, Ron said. Restoration specialist. She moves pieces occasionally. Her provenance documentation is usually solid. He closed the catalogue. The triptych is the one I want. The medallion is secondary. I'll see where the bidding goes. Natalie was watching him with the fond expression of someone who had heard variations of this speech many times. Natalie looked at him. You say secondary, and then you come home with both? Ron opened his mouth, closed it. That's happened twice. This would be the third time, Natalie said pleasantly. From inside the house came a soft thud. The soft sound of a cat landing on something upholstered. Ron looked at the screen door. Is she on my chair? He asked. You don't have a chair in there, Carol said. She knows which one I'd want, Ron said. Carol smiled. Yes, she does. Ron looked at the catalogue in his lap. Ron closed the catalogue with great dignity. I'll leave it here. Mary laughed. Ron's phone buzzed 20 minutes later. He read it, and was quiet for long enough that Natalie looked toward the porch. Ron? He came to the screen door. The auction's been postponed. The room shifted. By how long? Nancy asked. 2 days. They sent a notice. The seller had a family emergency. Out of town unexpectedly. He said it evenly, but Mary could hear the disappointment underneath. Which seller? Carol asked. Ron looked at the notice on his phone. Jill Sanger. She's the primary consigner. Several of the lots are hers. Nancy exhaled through her nose. Well, Nancy said. That's frustrating. Ron nodded. Yes. He set his phone down on his knee and looked out at the street. Natalie put her hand on his arm. It's 2 days. Not cancelled. I know, Ron said. After a moment, Wednesday then. Same plan, just Wednesday. A moment passed. Mary set down her cup. Topher's still in the hospital. The words landed simply, without accusation. The room went quiet in a different way. Yes, Carol said. Still stable, Nancy said. That's still the word. Stable, Mary said, is not the same as better. Nobody argued with that. They sat with it for a moment. The auction postponed. The catalogue sitting on Ron's lap. And somewhere across town a man in a hospital bed, who had no idea any of this was happening. We don't have answers yet, Nancy said finally. No, Mary said. Carol's hands rested still in her lap. Then we keep going. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was just true. Carol set down her coffee cup. The lighthouse will still be there on Wednesday. Yes, Ron said. He looked at his catalogue. Yes, it will. Mary watched him smooth the cover of the catalogue with one hand. Not dramatically. Just the small adjustment of someone recalibrating. Tell us about the lighthouse. He looked up. You want to hear about the lighthouse? Carol's been watching videos, Mary said. She knows things. Carol smiled. Tell me what you know about it. She turned to Ron. And I'll tell you what I know. Ron looked at her for a moment. Then he opened the catalogue and got back to business. There's a very good channel, Carol said. Natalie was smiling. Nancy was smiling. Mary reached for her coffee. Outside, the morning settled into itself. And nobody was in a hurry to go anywhere. And Nina found her sunny spot by the back window and closed her eyes. Wednesday would come soon enough. Chapter 12, The First Refuge. The idea was Nancy's, which meant it arrived fully formed and with an itinerary. Sebastian, she said Tuesday morning. Pelican Island. It's a 20-minute drive and none of us has been in years, and we're not going to Jupiter until tomorrow. Mary looked at her over her coffee. You want to go birdwatching? I want to go walking, Nancy said. There happened to be birds. Carol was already reaching for her cardigan. They drove north on US 1 with the Indian River Lagoon flashing silver on their right. The October light doing what October light did on the Treasure Coast, low and particular, making everything look like a photograph of itself. The citrus groves ran along the left for a long stretch, the smell of them faint but present even with the windows up. Nancy turned off at the sign for A1A and they drove east across the causeway, the lagoon opening up around them on both sides. The particular widening that happened when you crossed from the mainland to the barrier island. The water so close on both sides that it felt briefly like the road itself was floating. They parked at the trailhead. The jungle trail ran north along the lagoon side of Orchid Island. Narrow, unpaved, shaded by live oaks and cabbage palms, and the occasional ancient strangler fig, that had decided decades ago to climb something and never stopped. The air was different here, cooler, salt-edged. The sound of the road fell away quickly, and what replaced it was the particular quiet of a place that had been intentionally left alone. Pelican Island itself sat out in a lagoon, a small dark mass of mangroves, barely visible from the trail but present, the way important things were often present. You couldn't step foot on it. That was the point. President Roosevelt had signed the order establishing it in March 1903, making it the first national wildlife refuge in the country. And for more than 120 years people had been coming to the edge of the water, and looking at it, without going any further. America's first wildlife refuge, Nancy said, reading from a sign at the trailhead, 3 acres. That seems small, Mary said. It was enough, Carol said. They walked. The boardwalk section was wheelchair accessible, 500 feet of elevated walkway that took you out over the water's edge. The lagoon on 3 sides, an 18-foot observation tower at the far end. Nancy climbed it. Mary stood at the railing and watched a great blue heron stand motionless in the shallows below, so still it looked painted. She had kept birds for 20 years, cockatiels, conures, Quaker parrots, lovebirds, more than 250 at the height of it. An aviary that had been the consuming project of a particular decade of her life. She had sold most of them eventually, one at a time, as things changed, but she had never lost the habit of watching. Birds signaled everything: distress before it became visible, contentment before it became obvious, the particular quality of stillness that meant something was about to happen. The heron hadn't moved in 4 minutes. That was a heron fully at ease. She found that oddly comforting. Carol stood at the rail beside her, face turned toward the water. Osprey, Carol said. Somewhere to the left. Mary looked. A dark shape circling above a stand of mangroves, and hurried. Yes, she said. They make a very specific sound, Carol said. High, descending, Like a question. She paused. I've been listening to recordings of the lagoon. There's a whole channel on YouTube devoted to the soundscape here. Of course there is, Mary said. The roseate spoonbills, Carol continued, are supposed to be extraordinary. Pink. Nancy would like them. Nancy would take 17 photographs, Mary said. Yes. They stood there for a moment. The heron hadn't moved. The osprey was still circling. The lagoon made its small sounds, water against wood. The occasional call of something unseen. The investigation, for one brief and genuine moment, was not the thing Mary was thinking about. Then Nancy came down from the tower. There's someone I think I recognize, she said. She was on the main trail heading south as they were heading north. A young woman in her mid-20s, dark hair pulled back. The slightly unfocused expression of someone who had come here to think and was still thinking. She was carrying a reusable coffee cup from a place in Vero Beach Mary recognized. She was also, unmistakably, wearing an apron string hanging out of her jacket pocket, still tied around the waist, just tucked up. Lucia, Nancy said. The young woman looked up and blinked. Oh, she said. Hi. Then, registering them properly. You were there that morning. We were, Mary said. The lagoon moved past them without comment. Lucia looked at the water, then back at them. I come here when I need to think, she said. The bakery's been strange without them. Without everyone, actually. She meant Sam and Michelle, but she also meant the ordinary morning rhythm of the place. The sounds in the routine that had simply stopped and not yet resumed. Marco's been wonderful at the other place. He stops by sometimes, but it's just different. Yes, Mary said. They fell into step together naturally, heading south along the trail, the lagoon visible in flashes between the trees. Have you heard from Michelle? Mary asked, as casually as she could manage. Lucia looked at her sideways. Actually, yes, a few days ago. She shifted her coffee cup to the other hand. She texted me, which is, I mean, the signal there is terrible, so I was surprised to get anything. She paused. It was a bit of an odd message, actually. Mary kept her pace steady. Odd how? Lucia reached into her jacket pocket with a free hand and pulled out her phone. She scrolled for a moment, then held it out. Mary read it. Carol, walking on her other side, said quietly, would you read it aloud? For me. Lucia looked at her for a moment, then at the phone, and read. Hi Lucia, hope everything is okay there. Signal is terrible, so keeping this short. Quick question. Do you remember the woman who came in the morning we left? Red necklace, very striking, little red beads. She ordered the almond croissant and asked you something about our hours? I keep thinking about her. Something about the questions she asked felt off. Did she seem like a regular to you? The trail was quiet around them. A woodpecker somewhere in the canopy started up, then stopped. Do you remember her? Mary asked. Lucia nodded slowly. I do. She'd been in a few times before. Not a regular, but not the first time. Always ordered the almond croissant. She set down her pen. She asked how long Sam and Michelle would be gone. I told her a few weeks. She asked who'd be running things. I said the staff. We'd be in every day. She looked at the phone in her hand. At the time it just seemed like she was making conversation. But I've been thinking about it since Michelle texted. What did she look like? Nancy asked. Lucia described her. Knit, controlled, nothing out of place. Dark bag, red nails to match the necklace. The composed quality of someone who had decided before arriving exactly what she wanted, and was simply executing the plan. Mary looked at Nancy. Nancy looked at Mary. Did you ever see her speak to Toffer? Mary asked carefully. Lucia thought about it. Once. Maybe. They seemed to know each other. Not well, but they weren't strangers. She frowned slightly. Why? Does it matter? We don't know yet, Mary said. Which was true enough, for now. Lucia looked at her for a moment. Toffer is going to be all right, she said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes, Mary said. He is. Lucia nodded, and seemed to decide that was enough for now. They walked in silence for a few minutes. The trail curved back toward the parking area, the trees opening slightly as they approached the trailhead. A pair of white ibis picked their way along the water's edge with a careful elegance of birds who had been doing this for a very long time. Carol turned her face toward the lagoon. The osprey again, she said. Or another one. Does it matter? Lucia asked. Not really, Carol said. It's enough just to hear them. At the trailhead they said goodbye to Lucia, who was going to sit by the water a little longer before driving back to Vero. She looked, Mary thought, slightly less burdened than when they'd met her on the trail. Not resolved, just less alone with it. Mary understood the feeling. They walked back to the car. She was checking, Nancy said, when they were out of earshot, whether the bakery would be empty of its best people, whether anyone would be paying close attention. Yes, Mary said. She planned around them leaving, Carol said. Yes, the necklace was still a connection. The red beads with the black tips, worn to a botanical garden full of poisonous plants, worn to the bakery. The woman who asked careful questions about schedules, and never looked twice at three older women standing nearby. Mary thought about Rosary Peas. She wasn't ready to name it yet, but she was getting there. They stopped at Cat Hiram's on the way back down Indian River Drive. The same table on the deck. The same long view of the water. Milo waiting in the car with a window cracked and Nancy's promise of something from the kitchen. Mary ordered the chowder. She thought about the woman at the botanical garden, standing slightly apart from the group, not reacting the way everyone else reacted. She thought about a red necklace, bright, distinctive, impossible to miss. She thought about Lucia's description, nothing out of place, everything deliberate. And she thought about the way some things hid in plain sight, not because they were invisible, but because the people looking at them didn't yet know what they were looking at. She was starting to know. Before they left Cat Hiram's, Mary took out her phone. She thought about what Lucia had shown them on the trail, the red necklace, the careful questions about hours and schedules. She typed, "Hi Michelle, hope France is wonderful. Quick question, do you remember the woman who came in the morning you left? Red necklace, little red beads?" Lucia mentioned her. "Anything you remember about her will be helpful. No urgency, enjoy your trip." She put her phone away and finished her chowder. Whatever came back would come back when it came back. Chapter 13, The Lighthouse. Wednesday came the way Wednesdays do, without ceremony. Nancy drove. Mary navigated. Carol listened from the back seat, turned slightly toward the window, reading the world outside through whatever reached her there. The drive to Jupiter took just under an hour on US 1. Flat, direct. The landscape opening up as they moved south through Fort Pierce and Port St. Lucie, and into the wider stretches below Stewart. The Indian River lagoon flashed blue through the palms on the left. The sky was enormous and cloudless. "It's clearer out here," Carol said as they passed a long stretch of open road. Nancy nodded. "Less stopping, less noise, more space," Mary said, glancing at the line where land gave way to sky. Carol smiled faintly. "You can hear that." They rode the rest of the way in the easy quiet of people who didn't need to fill it, but something ran beneath the quiet, the unfinished thing that had been running beneath everything since Toffa collapsed. They were moving towards something today. Mary felt it. She suspected they all did. Ron and Natalie were already at the lighthouse parking lot when they arrived. Ron standing beside the car with his catalog tucked under one arm, and the expression of a man who had been waiting with barely sufficient patience. "You're 4 minutes late," he said. "We are exactly on time," Nancy said. "I've been here 8 minutes." Nancy smiled. "Then you're 8 minutes early, Ron," and walked past him toward the entrance. Mary had seen pictures of the Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse, but pictures hadn't prepared her for the scale of it. Red painted brick rising against a clear October sky, taller than she'd expected. Solid in the way of things built to outlast whoever built them. The grounds were quiet at this hour. A handful of visitors moved along the path. A guide stood near the base of the tower with a small group gathered around her. The sound of water came from somewhere through the trees. The inlet, close but not visible from here. Mary described it as they walked in. "Red tower, very tall. There's a museum building to the left. Looks like it was military at some point. And the inlet is right there, just past the trees." Carol turned her face toward the sound of the water. "Salt and mangrove," she offered, "and something older underneath." She paused. 5,000 years of occupation, she said, according to the archaeologists. Nancy glanced at her. "You really did your homework. There's a very good video," Carol said. Ron looked at her. "You knew about mead before I told you." "I knew about mead before I told anyone," Carol said, "which is rather the point. I've been going to this lighthouse for 15 years. "I know," Carol said. "You mentioned." Ron opened his mouth, closed it. "I'm going to start watching more YouTube," he said. The guide, a compact woman in her 60s with the easy authority of someone who had given this to her hundreds of times and still found it worth giving. "Gather them near the base of the tower. 105 steps to the top," she said. "Built in 1860. active ever since, with one interruption. Does anyone know what that interruption was? Mary opened her mouth. Nancy opened her mouth at exactly the same moment. The Civil War, they said together. The guide looked at them with mild surprise. Carol said nothing. That's right, the guide said. Confederate sympathizers disabled the light in 1861. It went dark for 5 years. The story of who relighted it is worth knowing. The head keeper at the time, a man named Armour, had been a Confederate deserter, Nancy said, who spent a war helping Union forces. The guide blinked. Yes, she said. Served as keeper for 40 years afterward. Mary added, pleasantly. That's correct, the guide said. Carol examined a crack in the brickwork near her elbow, and the design of the guide continued, recovering. Does anyone? Meade, Mary said. Lieutenant George Gordon Meade, Nancy said. Half a beat later, Army Corps of Engineers, Mary said. One of 6 lighthouses he designed in Florida, Nancy said. And 10 years later, Mary began. He commanded the Army of the Potomac, Nancy said. At Gettysburg, Mary finished. There was a short silence. The guide looked between them. You've done some research, she said carefully. We watched the video, Nancy said. Ron looked at Carol. Carol was still examining the brickwork. Carol, Ron said. Carol said. Did you? I sent them the link, Carol said. You're welcome. The guide laughed, genuinely, helplessly, and the tour continued. They climbed as far as accessibility allowed. Carol staying at the base with Mary while Nancy went up with a small group. Ron and Natalie went separately, Ron already pointing things out to Natalie before they'd reached the first landing. Mary and Carol stood near the base of the tower in the shade of a large live oak. The inlet was audible now, water moving against the jetty, the low slap of small waves. Tell me what you hear, Mary said. Carol tilted her head. The inlet, moving faster than the lagoon, the tidal flow through the cut. A pause. Osprey somewhere east, and the tower itself. The wind across the top of the lantern room makes a specific sound, like breath. Mary listened. She couldn't hear the breath, but she believed it. They stood quietly for a moment. Above them, through the canopy of the live oak, the sky was the deep blue of October in Florida, clear and deep and slightly indifferent to everything happening beneath it. 105 steps, Mary said. Yes, Carol said. I keep thinking about that. Someone built this thing step by step, stone by stone. She looked up at the tower. And now it's been here 160 years. Longer than anyone who built it, Carol said. Yes. Carol turned her face slightly toward the inlet sound. Things that are built to last, she said, are built differently from the beginning. The intention is in the materials. Mary thought about that. She wasn't entirely sure Carol was only talking about lighthouses. Nancy came back down 20 minutes later, her expression genuinely open. Someone who had just seen something worth seeing. The view, she said. Mary, the view. Tell us, Mary said. Nancy settled herself on a low stone wall and described it simply. The way the inlet met the ocean in a line of churning white. The lagoon spreading north in silver. The thin strip of Barrier Island between them like something drawn with a ruler. The lighthouse casting no shadow because the sun was directly overhead. The Gulf Stream visible as a deeper blue on the horizon. Carol listened with her eyes closed and her face very slightly lifted. Lighthouses warn people away from what looks like open water, she said when Nancy finished. Nobody answered right away. The reef is invisible until you're already on it, Carol continued. That's the point. The danger doesn't announce itself. The light does. Mary looked at her. Carol turned her face back toward the water. Shall we find the museum? Nancy fell into step beside Mary as they walked. We were rather good back there, Nancy said quietly. With the guide. We were, Mary agreed. Very knowledgeable. Very. A pause. She did send us the link, Nancy said. She did, Mary said. They both looked at Carol, walking slightly ahead, Kane reading the path. Carol, Nancy said. We want you to know that we're very grateful for the educational content you provide. You're welcome, Carol said, without turning around. We feel we've grown considerably as lighthouse enthusiasts. I'm glad to hear it. The guide seemed impressed. The guide seemed bewildered, Carol said. There's a difference. Mary laughed. Nancy smiled. Carol kept walking. Same time next lighthouse, she said. Absolutely, Nancy said. The museum building sat a short distance from the tower, a former military structure, low and solid, converted with care. Inside it was cool and dim. the displays arranged with the particular attention of people who understood they were custodians of something irreplaceable. Ron was already inside. He was standing in front of a case near the back wall, very still, his hands at his sides. Mary came to stand beside him. Under the glass, coins, chain fragments, a small religious medallion, a length of ship timber dark with age, each piece labeled and documented, preserved under carefully controlled light. She read the labels: silver rail, minted Mexico City, 1714, recovered Corrigan Rexite, 1967, gold chain fragment, passenger cargo, Regla Rec, recovered 1963, Real 8 Company, the Real 8 Company, Rex Stockers Company, Kip Wagner's team. Mary looked at the chain fragment, dark, corroded, each link still distinct, and thought about Rex standing at a lectern in the Sebastian Library 35 years ago, passing around a piece of 8 that still had salt on it, a small bronze crucifix in the corner of the case. The label read, personal devotional object, provenance uncertain, possibly from the Capitana, the fleet's flagship, lost July 31, 1715 with all hands. The surface was encrusted with what the accompanying card described as marine concretion, the gradual buildup of shell material, coral fragments, and mineral deposits that happened when metal spent decades on the ocean floor. The original bronze was barely visible underneath. "These are the real ones," Ron said. He said it quietly, almost to himself. Genuine 1715 fleet artifacts. Not reproductions. Not fakes. The actual pieces, pulled from the actual wrecks, off this actual coastline. He leaned slightly closer to the glass. "There's nothing like standing in front of them." "From the fleet?" Mary asked. "From the fleet." He leaned slightly closer to the glass. "Look at the patina, the way the corrosion distributes through the surface. You see how it's uneven? Deeper in the crevices, lighter on the raised areas? 300 years in salt water does that. It builds up differently in different places depending on depth, current, settlement, how close to the surface the piece was, whether it was buried in sand or exposed." He paused. "The marine concretion on the crucifix, that takes decades just to begin. You can't fake that." Not convincingly. Mary looked at the crucifix, then at the chain fragment. Each piece told a specific story of where it had been and what had happened to it. A story written in corrosion over 3 centuries. "What does a fake look like?" she asked. Ron straightened slightly. "Depends on how skilled the forger is. The usual method is chemical treatment, acids, oxidizing agents, to darken and age the surface, then abrasion to create wear patterns, then tumbling and grit to distribute the aging." He shook his head. "The problem is uniformity. You can make something look old. You can't make it look like 300 years of specific, random, environmental history." He tapped the glass lightly. "Nature doesn't produce even results. It produces this." He gestured at the display case. The uneven corrosion, the pitting that went deeper in one edge than the other, the chain fragment with its necessarily uneven distribution of oxidation that no tumbling machine could replicate. Something in his expression had shifted. Not alarm, not quite. The faint, uncomfortable formation of a question he wasn't ready to ask. "Ron?" Natalie said, from the next case over. "I'm fine," he said. "Just looking." He straightened and moved on, but Mary had seen it. She filed it away carefully. Chapter 14, the third time. The auction was 10 minutes from the lighthouse on South Beach Road. A building that announced itself with white canopy tents and the subtle but unmistakable presence of security. Men in dark clothing near the entrances. A check-in table with clipboards. Staff moving with the efficient care of people managing things that couldn't be replaced. Inside, the room was alive the way rooms were alive when serious people had gathered with serious intentions. Not loud, not chaotic. The murmur of conversations layered over each other, each one weighted. Collectors, dealers, historians, people who looked at things with a specific attention that came from knowing exactly what they were looking at. Display cases held coins, fragments, religious pieces, metals that had spent centuries on the ocean floor. Each lot had its number, its provenance card, its carefully worded description. Some cases drew small clusters of people, others were passed with only a glance. Mary moved slowly through the pre-auction viewing, reading as she went. Lot 3, a silver 8 real coin, minted Lima, 1714. The surface was dark and uneven, the cross motif still legible on one face. The Habsburg shield blurred but present on the other. The provenance card listed the recovery permit number, the site designation, the conservation date. Lot 7, an iron cannonball, recovered from the Fort Pierce Inlet site. Simple, heavy-looking, not beautiful, but the card noted it had been sitting on the ocean floor since July 31, 1715, and somehow that made it the most compelling thing in the case. Lot 12, a navigational divider, bronze, hinged, the tips still sharp. Someone had used this to plot a course. Someone had spread it across a chart in a ship's cabin and measured distance against scale, calculating how far they had come and how far they had to go. On the night of July 31st, they had been 7 days from Havana. Mary stood in front of it for a moment. She thought about the legal documents she had typed for 20 years. Contracts, depositions, pleadings, all of them artifacts too, in their way. Evidence that something had happened. That specific people in a specific place had done specific things. The divider was a deposition in bronze. She moved on. Carol walked near the center of the group, Kane reading the floor, face open and still as she built the room in her mind. How far to the center? She asked. We're in it, Nancy said. Mapping it, Carol said. The room had a sound she was still assembling, the murmur of serious conversation, not casual, not social, but weighted. The quiet that fell around each display case as people leaned in to look. The soft footsteps of staff moving between tables. And underneath all of it, the faint electrical hum of the lighting system, climate-controlled air, the building itself. She had been in enough rooms to know what the atmosphere of money and expertise sounded like. This was that room. Near one of the larger coin cases, two men in their 60s argued in low voices with the energy of people who had been having this argument for years and found it sustaining. The surface wear is wrong, the first man said. He had a loop. Too uniform. The documentation is impeccable, the second replied. He had opinions that didn't require a loop. Documentation can be impeccable and wrong. Neither of them seemed particularly troubled by the disagreement. It had the quality of a conversation that kept them both sharp. Nancy leaned toward Mary. Is this what all auctions are like? I have no idea, Mary said, but I like these people. A woman near the registration table was explaining to a younger man, her son, by the look of them, that the piece in Lot 7 had been misdescribed, almost certainly from a different wreck entirely, probably the Urca de Lima rather than the Corrigan site. The son was writing everything down. The woman had the air of someone who had forgotten more about Spanish colonial metalwork than most people would ever learn, and was making sure her son didn't make the same mistake. At the far end of the room, near a case of religious pieces, a man in his 70s stood perfectly still in front of a small gold crucifix on a velvet mount. He wasn't reading the provenance card. He wasn't looking at anything except the piece itself. His hands were clasped behind his back. Whatever he was thinking, he wasn't sharing it with anyone. Carol paused as they passed him, just for a moment. What? Mary asked quietly. He's been there since we came in, Carol said. He hasn't moved. He's not looking. He's remembering something. Mary glanced back at the man. What do you think he's remembering? Carol considered it. Someone, she said. Not something. Ron moved through the pre-auction viewing with the focused attention of a man who had already made his decisions but wanted to confirm them in person. He stopped at the triptych, Lot 26, for a long time. The three hinge panels were smaller than Mary had imagined from the catalog photograph. The central image of Santiago was worn to a soft impression, the pilgrim's staff barely legible, the scallop shell at his feet almost gone. But the piece itself was unmistakably beautiful, the kind of beautiful that came from age and survival rather than perfection. Ron didn't touch the case. He just stood there. Still the one, he said quietly, to himself as much as anyone. Natalie put her hand briefly on his arm. Nancy went still first. Mary felt it before she saw it. That shift in Nancy's posture, that meant something had registered. Don't turn too fast, Nancy said quietly. Mary turned slowly, and there she was, standing near a display case on the far side of the room, composed, still, neutral clothing, dark bag held close, red nails resting on the strap, and at her throat, the strand of glossy red beads, bright and unmistakable, the necklace they had seen at the botanical garden, at the bakery. The morning toffer collapsed, and now here, 3 times. Mary watched her carefully. Jill Sanger's gaze moved around the room, entrance, display cases, staff, the bidder near the front, the woman with the pearl earrings, methodical, assessing, It did not stop on the gals, not even briefly. 3 older women looking at artifacts. Nothing there. Nothing worth a second thought. Mary felt a unique mix of it. The small familiar sting of being invisible and the advantage of it arriving in the same breath. She had felt it her whole life, in 100 different rooms. She was done being stung by it. She kept her eyes on Jill and kept her expression completely blank and watched everything. Carol spoke softly, without being told anything. What changed? Nothing, Nancy said. That's the problem, Mary said. The woman checked her phone, quickly. Then again, her gaze moved to the entrance, then back to the displays, then to the staff moving between the tables. Not restless, not obvious, but not casual either. There was a quality of waiting to her that had nothing to do with the auction itself. She's waiting for something, Carol said. Nancy glanced at her. For what? I don't know, Carol said. But she's not here for the lots. Then, a voice near the entrance. A staff member spoke briefly to the woman, who responded in low, even tone. Something about a consignment, a provenance question, logistics. Her voice was controlled and frictionless, the voice of someone used to getting what she asked for. Carol's head turned almost imperceptibly toward the sound. Something settled in her expression. Not recognition, not quite, but a filing. The quiet click of something being placed alongside something else without yet knowing why. Mary would have missed it if she hadn't been watching. The bidding opened promptly at 2 o'clock. Lots 1 through 25 moved with the brisk efficiency of an auctioneer, who had done this many times and understood that pace was part of the experience. Paddles lifted and dropped. Numbers climbed and settled. The room contracted around each lot and then released. Carol had found, over the years, that auctions were easier to follow by sound than sight people might expect. The auctioneer's rhythm told you everything: the acceleration when bids were coming fast, the deliberate pause before a gavel strike, the particular quality of silence that meant a room was holding its breath. She had been listening for 10 minutes and already understood the shape of how this one moved. Ron sat forward when Lot 26 was announced. The triptych was brought forward on a small velvet-covered board, the 3 panels open and facing the room. Under the auction lighting, the relief was more legible than it had been in the display case. The pilgrim's staff clear now, the scallop shell at Santiago's feet visible. The pilgrim's face worn smooth by 3 centuries of salt water but still carrying the suggestion of devotion. Lot 26, the auctioneer said. A gilt bronze devotional triptych, Santiago de Compostela, 3 hinged panels, recovered from the Corrigan wreck site, authenticated, opening at 4,000. Ron's paddle went up immediately. 4. Thank you. 4-5. 2 other paddles, then a third. The man near the front in the pale linen shirt. The settled confidence of someone who had come specifically for this, and had already decided what he was willing to spend. 5. 5,000. 5-5. Ron stayed in. 6. 6-5. Nancy leaned toward Mary. How high will he go? I don't know, Mary said honestly. 7. 7-5. The man near the front didn't hesitate. His paddle lifted with the unhurried certainty of someone who had decided his number before he sat down, and felt no need to revise it. Ron studied his bidding card. 8, he said. The auctioneer acknowledged him. 8,000. Do I hear 8-5? The man near the front lifted his paddle. 8-5. 9. Ron was quiet. The room waited. Ron set his paddle down, not with frustration, with the clean decision of someone who knew his number and had reached it. 9,000. Going once. The room contracted. Going twice. Silence. Salt. The gavel struck. Ron exhaled through his nose. Natalie put her hand on his arm. He patted it once. I knew what I was willing to pay, he said. He was willing to pay more. That's how it works. Nancy looked at him with something close to respect. That's very mature. It took years, Ron said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the empty velvet board where the triptych had been. Someone prayed with that, he said quietly. Someone else will, Mary said. Ron nodded. Once. Then turned back to his catalogue. Lot 42 was announced 40 minutes later. Ron straightened. The St. Christopher medallion was brought forward, and even from several rows back, Mary could see that the catalogue photograph had not done it justice. It was larger than she'd expected. Substantial. A gold disc perhaps the size of a large pocket watch, thicker and heavier looking than any modern charm. The relief showed a robed figure mid-stride through water, a child on his shoulders, a staff in his hand. Worn by 3 centuries on the ocean floor but still legible, still present. still carrying the weight of what it had meant. Someone had worn this on the night of July 31st, 1715, 7 days out of Havana. When the storm came in, opening at 3,000, the auctioneer said. Ron's paddle went up before he'd finished the sentence. The bidding moved quickly, 2 other paddles, converging and dropping, until it was just Ron and the woman with the pearl earrings from earlier, who had held her ground through several lots with unhurried precision. She bid with the small, economical paddle raise of someone who had been doing this for decades. 5, 5, 5, 6. Ron, clean, immediate. 6, 5. The woman with the pearl earrings looked at the medallion one more time, set her paddle down. 7,000, going once. The room held, going twice. Ron didn't move. Salt. The gavel came down. Clean. Final. Ron exhaled slowly. It's mine, he said quietly. Natalie squeezed his arm. You did it. Nancy leaned back. That was stressful and I wasn't even bidding. Mary glanced across the room. The woman with the red necklace was watching. Not the medallion. Not the auctioneer. Watching Ron. Not surprised. Not interested. Satisfied. Then she checked her phone once more and moved her gaze back toward the entrance. The same patient attention she'd been giving it all afternoon. Whatever she was waiting for still hadn't arrived. Carol spoke quietly. She didn't care who won. Nancy frowned. What do you mean? She wasn't watching the auction, Carol said. She was watching for something else. Mary felt that land solidly. Ron came back from the payment table a few minutes later, receipt in hand. Already reading it with the careful attention he gave to documents that mattered. Mary leaned in beside him. Nancy looked over his other shoulder. The receipt listed the lot, the hammer price, the buyer's premium, and at the bottom, in the seller field, consignor, Jill Sanger. Nobody said anything for a moment. Mary looked across the room. The woman with the red necklace was still there, still composed, still waiting. The same woman they had seen at the botanical garden, at the bakery the morning Toffer collapsed. Here, now with a name. Carol's voice was quiet. Now we know who she is? Mary nodded slowly. They still didn't know what mattered, only that they were getting closer, and that whatever Jill Sanger was waiting for, hadn't arrived yet. Ron dreamed that night. He was on a ship, not in distress, not in a storm, just an ordinary evening at sea, the kind of evening that existed before the storm, before July 31st, before everything that came after. The sky was the deep blue of the Atlantic at dusk, and the ship moved with a slow steady purpose that felt entirely safe. A man stood at the rail. Spanish, Ron understood without being told. A merchant or a nobleman, someone of substance, someone who had made this crossing before and expected to make it again. He was dressed for the period in the way that dreams dress people, with a particular authority of images that arrived already certain of themselves. He was wearing the medallion. Ron could see it clearly, hanging at the man's chest, catching the last of the evening light. St. Christopher, robed, carrying the child across the water. But the surface of it was different from the piece Ron had bought that afternoon. Dark and irregular, worn unevenly in the way of something that had been touched every day for years. The high points smooth and bright where hands had contacted them repeatedly. The low points darker, deeper, the metal having retreated in different places, under the slow pressure of time and salt and sea air. The man turned and looked at Ron. He didn't speak. He just looked, with the particular expression of someone who had been waiting for the right person to notice something, and was not yet certain he was looking at that person. Ron looked at the medallion, at the uneven surface, at the irregular patina, at the particular quality of something that had been aged by life rather than by process. Then he woke up. The room was dark. Natalie was breathing beside him, steady and undisturbed. The clock said 3:14. Ron lay still for a moment. Then he got up quietly, took the medallion from its box on the desk, and held it under the lamp. The surface was even, consistent. The patina sitting uniformly across the piece the way a treatment sat, rather than the way time sat. He stood there for a while. He didn't know what he was looking at, but something in him had changed the way he was looking. He put it back in the box and went back to bed. In the morning Natalie looked at him across the coffee cups. You were up. Couldn't sleep. She waited. I had a strange dream, he said. About the medallion. Strange how? He was quiet for a moment. The man who originally owned it. In the dream his piece looked different from mine. He paused. The surface was different. Natalie looked at him steadily. Ron, it's just a dream. I know, he said. He picked up his coffee. I know, he said again. but over the rim of the cup he was still looking at the box. Chapter 15. What doesn't fit? The drive back from Jupiter was quieter than the drive out. Nancy drove. Mary sat in the passenger seat watching the road but not really seeing it. Carol was in the back. Still, none of them spoke for the first several miles. The receipt with Jill Sanger's name on it sat in Nancy's bag. The lighthouse was behind them. The auction was behind them. Ron and Natalie were in their own car somewhere on the same road. Ron presumably studying his new purchase with the complicated attention of someone who had paid $7,000 for something and was still deciding how he felt about it. And somewhere in Vero Beach, Topher Grant was still in a hospital bed with no clear explanation for why. The name sat with Mary. Jill Sanger. She turned it over the way you turned a stone, not looking for anything specific, just feeling the weight of it. They had seen this woman 3 times. The botanical garden, the bakery, the auction. 3 places, and at each one she had been composed, and still and watching something that wasn't what everyone else was watching. A name was not an answer, but it was more than they'd have this morning. She wasn't there by accident, Nancy said finally. Any of the 3 times? No, Carol said. The garden was research, Mary said slowly. She was learning about the plants, specifically about what they did and how. Mary set down her glass. The bakery was the morning Topher collapsed. She was there because she needed to be there. She looked at the road, and the auction was her business. She was selling. 3 appearances, Nancy said. 3 purposes, all of them connected to what she was doing, which means, Carol said, she was always in control, until she wasn't. The road opened up, US 1 heading north, flatter and faster than Indian River Drive. The landscape more industrial on the edges but still coastal underneath. A cluster of royal palms marked the entrance to a development that hadn't been there 5 years ago. A roadside stand selling boiled peanuts had a hand-lettered sign that said "Best in Florida," a claim that Mary had seen on approximately 47 roadside stands in her time. She almost smiled. "We should go to the police," she said. Nobody argued. Mary's phone buzzed as they were pulling out of the farm stand parking lot. Michelle again. The signal apparently still holding. She had a red necklace, very striking, little red beads with black tips, very uniform. I remember thinking it was unusual. Beautiful but unusual. Does it matter? Is everything okay? Your last text felt a little careful. Mary read it in the car. Then she looked at Nancy. Nancy looked at her. Little red beads with black tips. Very uniform. Rosary peas. The guide's voice at the botanical garden. Used in jewelry and crafts because they're so striking. Bright red, black-tipped, perfectly uniform in size. Mary typed back quickly, "Everything's fine. Thank you. This is helpful. Enjoy France." She put the phone away. Michelle just confirmed the necklace, she said. Red beads with black tips. Uniform. She noticed them that morning. Nancy was already nodding. Carol was very still. "Rosary peas," Nancy said. "Yes," Mary said. The car was quiet for a moment. It felt like pieces clicking into place. It felt, Mary thought, like certainty. She would remember that feeling later, the bright confidence of it, and she would not enjoy the memory. The Vero Beach Police Department was not what Mary had expected. Not that she'd had a clear picture. A solid building on 20th Street, professional and unhurried. The atmosphere of a place where things were taken seriously without drama. The officer who took their information was younger than Mary had pictured. Mid-30s, careful with his notebook. The kind of listener who didn't fill silences with reassurance. His name was Detective Reyes. Nancy did most of the talking. "We've seen this woman 3 times, she said. She set a folded piece of paper on the desk. She had written the name down in the car, in her precise handwriting, the way she did everything. Jill Sanger, first at the McKee Botanical Garden, October 8th. Then at a slice of Paris the morning Topher Grant collapsed. She was there. We saw her. Then today at a Treasure Coast auction in Jupiter, where she was listed as the seller for the piece our friend purchased." Detective Reyes looked at the paper. "You were present at Mr. Grant's collapse." "We were," Nancy said. "And you observed this woman there, standing near the door," Mary said. "Not moving toward him, not moving away, just watching." The detective wrote something down. "You mentioned the botanical garden. What was the occasion?" "The spooky plant expo at McKee," Nancy said. "We attended a tour of toxic plants. Oleander was among them." She paused, choosing her next words with the care of someone who understood how things sounded once said out loud. She was wearing a necklace made of rosary peas, which were also covered on the tour. Also toxic. Detective Reyes looked up. You're suggesting she poisoned Mr. Grant? We're saying we've seen her 3 times in circumstances that don't feel coincidental, Carol said. The connection to toxic plants is observable. What it means, we don't know. The detective studied her for a moment. The toxicology on Mr. Grant, he said carefully, has not returned a finding consistent with poisoning by rosary pea. Nancy's chin lifted. We know, Nancy said. The arsenic result was explained by shellfish. The broader screen is still running. She met his eyes. We're not telling you what the answer is. We're telling you what we've observed. Detective Reyes nodded slowly. Jill Sanger, he said, reading the name again. Seller at a Treasure Coast auction. He made a note. The auction itself, was it legitimate? Established? Ron's name came up. His purchase. The receipt. The fact that the piece was described as Spanish colonial, 1715 fleet provenance. The detective rode steadily. And you felt the auction had been delayed? The preview timing was off, Nancy said. According to our friend who follows these things closely, something was being waited on, Carol said. Detective Reyes looked at her. Waited on how? She checked her phone repeatedly. Carol said. Watch the entrance, not the lots. The auction itself didn't seem to be what she was there for. The detective was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll look into it. Not a dismissal, not a promise either. The measured response of someone who had heard things that were worth writing down without yet knowing where they led. Mary stood. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming in, he said. And he meant it. She could tell that much. Outside, the October sun was warm and direct. Nancy exhaled. That felt better. He listened, Carol said. He did. Mary agreed. They had given what they had. Now it was in someone else's hands. Partially, at least. The part that came next was still theirs. They didn't go straight home. Nelson Family Farms sat on West Midway Road in Fort Pierce, between Oleander Avenue and US 1. About halfway between Jupiter and Vero. A natural stop on the drive north if you knew it was there. The gals knew it was there. It had been there since 1938. The open-air market spread out under a long canopy. Rows of produce in wooden crates. Citrus stacked in pyramids. Tomatoes and peppers and things Mary didn't have names for, arranged in the particular abundance of a place that took its produce seriously. The air smelled of earth and something citrus sharp, and the faint sweetness of flowers from the ornamental section. At the far end, a ceiling fan turned overhead, moving the air without cooling it significantly. The market had the inherent quality of a place that had been doing this for long enough not to feel the need to rush. Customers moved at the pace of the place, slowly, attentively, the way people moved when they were buying food rather than groceries. Mary picked up a basket. Carol moved alongside her, cane tapping lightly on the packed dirt path, head slightly turned. Earth, she said, and citrus, and something sweeter underneath. Gardenia, maybe. There's a flower stand at the far end, Mary said, and hay somewhere, Carol added. The farm sells eggs and feed, Nancy said, reading a handwritten sign. Old Florida. Yes, Carol said. That's exactly what it smells like. Nancy grabbed a peach from a wooden bin and turned it in her hand. October peaches. I did not expect that. Florida, Mary said. Florida, Nancy agreed, and put 3 more in the basket. They moved slowly through the rows. Citrus, strawberries, squash. A bin of something labeled local honey that Nancy spent longer than necessary examining. A woman nearby was loading grapefruit into a tote bag, with the systematic efficiency of someone filling a weekly order. A man in a sun hat was asking detailed questions about the tomatoes that the young man behind the stand was answering with patient good humor. A small girl ran past with a sample cup of something orange, her mother 2 steps behind with the resigned expression of someone who had already accepted that the afternoon was going to involve a great deal of produce touching. Carol smiled at the sound of the small quick footsteps, the particular pitch of a child's delight. Mary stopped at the ornamental section. Potted plants in rows, flowering things, trailing things, things with leaves in shapes she didn't recognize. Small handwritten signs identified them by name. Some had a small red dot beside the label. She leaned closer to one of the signs. Ornamentals, some toxic if ingested. Please ask staff. She stood there for a moment. The rosary peas, the botanical garden, the tour guide's voice. Not everything beautiful is safe. Nancy appeared beside her. So, she said, we're thinking poison. Still, Mary nodded slowly. It fits. The beads, the garden, the timing. Nancy gestured slightly with the peach she was still holding. Everything points to Jill Sanger. Carol had stopped nearby, her hand resting lightly on a display shelf. It's deliberate, she said. That's what worries me, Mary said. Someone who plans that carefully. Nancy's phone rang. The sound cut clean through the warm market air. Nancy glanced at the screen. The hospital. Mary straightened. Answer it. Nancy did. A pause. Her expression shifted. Not alarm, but the particular stillness of someone receiving information that required recalibration. Okay, she said slowly. Another pause. Are you sure? She lowered the phone. The market went on around them. Voices, movement, the cheerful ordinary noise of people buying vegetables on a Wednesday afternoon. It wasn't Rosary P, Nancy said. Silence. Mary's chest tightened. What? They ran the full toxicology, Nancy said. No trace of Rosary P alkaloids. None. Carol didn't move. Then we were wrong, she said. Not with distress. With the clean precision of someone correcting a calculation. Mary nodded. Slowly. Yes. Nancy exhaled. So now what? Carol turned slightly toward her. Now, she said, we stop looking at what fits, a beat, and start looking at what doesn't. Mary looked back at the ornamental plants, at the small red dots beside certain labels, at the handwritten warning printed in careful letters. Some toxic. Not all. And not always the ones you expected. The Rosary P theory was wrong. But Jill Sanger was still there. Still connected. Still the seller of a piece Ron had paid $7,000 for. Still the woman who had been in 3 places she had no obvious reason to be. The method was wrong. Everything else still held. Nancy set the peach back in the basket. Okay, she said. We start over. Not over, Carol said quietly. Further. Mary picked up a jar of local honey from a nearby shelf, and turned it in her hands without really seeing it. Further along, past the assumption they'd been carrying, not back at the beginning. Whatever Jill Sanger had done, or hadn't done, the Rosary P's were a wrong turn. A beautiful, logical, completely wrong turn. And now they needed to find the right one. Mary set the honey in the basket. Let's finish shopping, she said. Nancy looked at her. You want to shop right now? Mary smiled. I want to think. Shopping helps me think. Nancy considered this. Then she picked up 2 more peaches. Fine, she said. But I'm getting the strawberries. Nancy made the call from the parking lot. She had the auction house number from the catalog. She had kept it. The way she kept everything that might be useful later. She sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and the windows down and dialed. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. Nancy kept her voice level and efficient. The particular register she had used for 30 years when she needed information quickly from someone who didn't know her. This is Nancy Roberts. I was a bidder at your October 20th auction, and I'm following up on the postponement notification we received. Can you confirm the reason that was given? A brief pause. The sound of someone checking the screen. Family emergency, the woman said. The primary consignor requested a 2-day extension. It's noted here as a personal matter. She indicated she had to travel unexpectedly. And the consignor's name? I'm sorry, I can't give out. Jill Sanger. Nancy said. I'm not asking. I'm confirming. Another pause. That. Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Nancy said. One more question. Did she call it in herself, or did someone call on her behalf? A longer pause this time. She called directly. The woman said slowly. Is there something? Should I be? No, Nancy said. You've been very helpful. Thank you. She ended the call. She sat for a moment. She had told them a family emergency had taken her out of town. She had called it in herself. And Carol had heard her voice at the Cardinal Drive post office, in Vero Beach, on the same day the postponement had been called in. She had never left. Nancy looked at the store entrance where Mary and Carol were still visible through the glass, moving slowly along the produce aisle. She got out of the car and went back in. I have something, she said quietly, appearing beside Mary at the strawberries. Mary looked at her. Already. She called the postponement in herself. Nancy said. Said she had to travel unexpectedly. Family emergency. She paused. She didn't travel. Carol heard her at the post office. The 3 of them stood among the peaches and strawberries and local honey. She lighted the auction house. Mary said. Yes, Nancy said. To buy herself time, Carol said. Yes, Carol nodded once, for the package to arrive. The right turn, right there in the produce aisle of Nelson Family Farms.